We're up to Daf Mem Daled Amud Aleph. The discussion we're having right now was when does the Kesuva become, the lien on the properties, on the assets to Kesuva? When does that happen? So we said we're following the opinion that says that the Kesuva doesn't kickstart from the marriage, but actually kickstarts from when they got engaged, even though they didn't write the Kesuva itself formally until they got married. So we had one opinion of Abuna. We said that there's the central part of the Kesuva, which is $200 or the $100, depending on Mona or Psula. That part of the Kesuva starts straight away from the Erison, and the additional parts start from the marriage. And Abasi said no, they both start from the marriage. So we asked, according to Ravuna, it seems that there are two parts to the Kesuva. So we asked, how can Ravuna say that? We learned if you put out two Ksuvas, one you put in 200, one you put in 300, and Ravuna said you could choose whichever one you want. We don't say that you take part from one and take part from another. And we don't say that, according to the way Rav Huna works, you should say 200 come from the first Kesuva and the additional part comes from the second Kesuva. And we explained that no, because he wrote two different stutters, that looks like two options. You can either choose this star or that star. If he would have added the words, and I'm adding you further, then you're right. And the first star is still effective, and the second one is adding. But because he wrote a second star, the word adding, it's like he's replacing it. It's as if you're saying you're Meichel the first star, and now let's work with the second star. So now we'll explore further what exactly Rav Huda is saying. Says the Gemara, Omamar. Sorry, we're up to Gufa. And one of the Gemara wanted to say is it seems that Rav Huna is actually arguing with Rav Nachman, because Rav Huna says you have a choice, whichever star you want, you can use. And Rav Nachman seems to state that if you have two stars on a sale, if you have two contracts put out on a sale, one on this day, and then 5 months later you put out another star, the second one cancels the first one. So, and Rav Huna says that you have an option. You can use either the first Kesuva or the second Kesuva. So they seem to be arguing. So he said no. Nachman himself agrees that if the second star was written with an addition, then the reason why you wrote the second star was not to cancel the first one. You wrote to add that additional part. For example, you decided the field I sold you, and I'm adding a palm tree to it. If you added a palm tree, then everyone agrees that the second star is not canceling the first one. I'm giving you a choice, as I'll explain in a minute. So the same thing over here also. He's adding from 200 to 300. So therefore, it's not canceling the first one. You have a choice which star you want to use. Now, why would you choose if the second one is better than the first one? What's going on here? So you want to explain. Nachman said, you have two contracts for a sale, one after another. The second one cancels the first one. But Nachman himself concedes. In other words, the reason why he cancels it, if you made a replica of the first star, why did you write it again? Obviously, you want to cancel the first one, and you want the second one to come into train. We'll soon see what's the difference. Rav Nachman, however, is moided. The second star was written for another purpose altogether. You want to add something, you want to expand the area. Then the Taisefis Kasa, you wrote it not to cancel the first one, but actually to add it. So now the Gemara explains what's going on. If it's so what do you mean? What's the two starters all about? Pshita. There's no question. If Rishon Remechel, let's say the first star you said, I'm selling you this and this property, and Rishon even Matana. The second star, however, you write, I'm giving this the same kind of property, but you know what? I'm giving to you as a gift. So in a way, I'm enhancing the sale. How am I doing that? Because when you sell something to somebody, the next door neighbor is called the bar metzah, the one who's on the boundary. He has a right to claim that you should have sold the property to me. I live right next door. It would have benefited me. And not only has a right to claim it, he can actually take the buyer to court and force him to give him the property, and he has to reimburse him. But he can seize the property. So therefore, but if you give a gift, you can't claim, oh, but I'm a next door neighbor, give it to me, because of Matana, you can't say that. So therefore, by giving the second star of the Matana, he's strengthening the party, the recipient, the beneficiary. So it makes sense. So then the second star, you have a choice now using the first star or the second star. Now, why Pshita? The first one was a sale, and the second one was a gift. He wrote it to improve it. Even if he doesn't give me any more property, anything else, he's just saying the exact same property, but instead of calling it a sale, he's saying I'm giving you matana. And this is to avoid that the neighbor should come and try to complain and reverse the whole sale. Because by a gift, the neighbor can't claim anything. The cost of he wants to help him out because it's in the Balmetz. So surely it makes sense to give him a second star. Okay. What do you call Surely, the first one he gave the gift, the second one's a sale. Again, you're improving him. The second lot to make sense why you're writing it to improve it. I mean, we say Mishum Din with the Kazaken. He wrote because of Balchayv, and that is that if it comes to a gift, I give you a gift of property, and there's a lien on this property from some lender of mine. He comes in, takes away the property. Let's say I have nothing else to pay him with. He takes away the property. And you will not get any reimbursement. If it's a gift, you lost it. But if I gave it to you as a sale and then somebody sees the property, you can turn around to me and get it back. So if I take this gift that I gave you and I turn around and turn it into a sale, I'm actually improving your lot. I'm strengthening you. So then I'm not trying to cancel the first star. I'm just trying to strengthen you the star. And therefore, the better it is. And Tesis interesting says, and the idea is that you have now both stars in your hand, the gift and the sale, and you can decide which one you want to use. You can hide depending what the story is. If the Babesha comes along to you, hide the sales star and use only the gift star. If a lender comes to you, hide the gift star and use the sales star. So therefore, both stars are in a way effective. They're not canceling each other out, right? Because each one is giving a different thing. What do you call it? Ella ish name but if exactly the same star. One was written in the month of this, and then 6 months later, we'll do exactly the same star again in the month of, let's say, El, the Bittul Shainis edition, then definitely the second star is canceling the first star. So my time is, why does it cancel the first star? Two possible reasons. Rafram says, Eimer, it must be that what we're conceding the first star was actually a fraudulent star, and the second one replaces it because this is a genuine star. Now, we say Achle Shabudei. Now, Acha says no. We say that what do you call it? That we're canceling the star so that any properties that were sold between the first star and the second star, I have a right to this property first. I am Meichel my rights to the buyer. Meichel the rights to the property first. And I'm prepared to start my rights from 6 months later, whenever you wrote the second one. Says the Gemara. Interesting. Jason wants to know if it's talking about a gift. What do you mean? I am Meichel my shibud by a matana. What shibud is there? And Taisha says, what happened between the first star and the second star? The vendor bought a field right next to what do you call it? Right next door to the one who received the property. So. Now the one who, in other words, the vendor bought another field right next to the property that he's giving the property away to. If the buyer can then say, if I own the property from Nissan and you, the vendor, then wrote me another star in Tishrei. If I bought the property, if I receive the property in Nissan, and then this vendor, the donor, buys a property right next door to it in Sivan, I could say, hey, I'm the next door neighbor, but Metzger, I want it. But if I'm Meichel my shibud, my right to this property from this, and I'm going to start from El, then when you the donor bought it in Sivan, I was not a neighbor yet, and therefore I can't claim. So that means I'm giving up my rights to that property. And let's start my connection to this property from El. Anyway, what's the difference if the reason why I can't is because we're assuming it's fraudulent, or the reason is because we're saying I'm Meichel my shibud? Few differences. Number one, if we're saying that it's fraudulent, we're saying that witnesses there are signed fraudulently. That means we're ruining their reputation, and they are apostle aedis. That's how Rashi learns. Taisa finds it very odd that because I said that this star is fraudulent, therefore I apostle aedis. He did aid him to apostle aedis. So Taisa therefore says one shot. It means that if I have any other documents in my house with those same two adim signed in it, I already said, as far as I'm concerned, I cannot trust them, and all those stars are cancelled. On the other hand, if the reason is because I am Meichel my shibud, then there's no reflection on the witnesses. I'm just Meichel. That's number one. Number two, the stume paid. Let's say the beneficiary, does he have to pay for all the produce that he ate from the first star to the second, the date on the second star? If it's a fraudulent star, then yes, it wasn't his. What are you eating it for? Pay the produce. If it's a good star, I'm just Meichel the shibud, then of course I had a right to eat from it, and therefore I could eat from it. That's the second one. And the third one, the tasker, who pays the taxes for the property during that time. If it's a fraudulent, I never owned it, then the donor Well, the vendor has to pay taxes. But if I'm just Moichel the Shibud, then of course I have to pay taxes. Is my Havala the Ksuva? Getting back to the question of the Ksuva, when our original question started, when do you collect the Shibud on the Ksuva? It starts from the engagement time or from the marriage. Toshba coming in, I'm going to give him it's an argument. Abelazar said to Shimon, Mon, Masayim, the Tanai Bez, and that which is mandatory, that starts as you got engaged. With Edison, with Tesefis, anything you want to add on, that starts from soon you get married. And the Chachamim say, it all starts from the marriage because that's when you recorded it. The Hilchasa and the Allah is it all starts from the marriage. Now we're continuing. Until now, we spoke about our oinus and an mafata. If somebody forces on a woman, somebody seduced a woman, but there you have to pay a penalty. You have to marry by mafata. If you marry, you don't pay the penalty. But if by oinus, you have to pay the penalty, and you have to marry, as long as they want or the father wants. Then we have a concept called Moiti Shemra. Moiti Shemra is I married your daughter, and I found that she has an absolute, and I'm convinced, and I have witnesses actually, that she was mezaneh while she was engaged during a 12-month period. She was engaged, and if it turns out to be the witnesses are saying the truth, then she has to be killed. And the pasuk says, you take this girl, the Naira, and you bring it to Pesach Beisavir, to the doorway of her father's house, to show the father, see, this is the kind of daughter you raised. And she receives skila. While they're engaged, the punishment is the harshest punishment. Skila, once they're married and she commits adultery, she only gets chenek. But then it's skila, and everyone stones her. And then to the pasuk of a mason, she will die, because she did a terrible abomination by the Eden, to be mezanah by the house of her father, and you should get rid of the wrath. It turns out to be that he lied. Then he gets malchus for creating, for propagating his false name. He gets malchus, and he has to pay $100. And the witnesses, if they were found mizumamim, if the witnesses actually found liars, that means they were not even there, then they get killed. So now the Mishnah is going to give us three different possibilities regarding a giyera, someone who doesn't really have a father. What happens then? Is there lashes to the man? Is there a penalty? Says the Mishnah. Case number one. Hagiyedis, a conversion is Gaida, Bita Ima, that she converted together with her daughter. So she was born not Jewish, so she really doesn't have a father. Vizinsa, and then she committed adultery during that engagement period. Hareizu bechenek. In this case, you only receive a chenek. Even though she became engaged under 3 years old, so therefore definitely she's a psula. She gets why? Because skila is only by a Yisrael. The pasuk says, Ki osran avola be Yisrael. Only Yisrael, she wasn't Yisrael. She started and she was a Gieris. Okay, ain't law, and also there's no din. So as far as punishment is concerned, it's commuted to chenek. And number 2 is ain't law like Pesach, basically, we don't bring it to the house of the father to punish her. The loy mea sella, nor do we the penalty to the man or malchus. There's no $100 if the husband lied. Because again, everything's written by Yisrael. We're talking about the Eidim were found to be Zaymimin, they were found to be lies, it couldn't have been true, so the opposite husband is lying, they get killed, but he gets $100 and Malchus. Case number 2. She was conceived while the parents were going, but somewhere in the interim, while the mother was pregnant, she became Jewish. So she was born as a Jew, but she was conceived as a goy, so therefore she's not really Yisrael. Harei Zubeskila. In this case, even though she's not really Yisrael, she will get skill, and we'll see why it says in the pasuk Yisrael. But we'll say the word Vamesa, and she adds something, even this girl. But as far as he's concerned, we'll see. We don't bring it to the house of the father, and obviously he has no father. But more than that, it's not really Yisrael. Well, they may a seller, nor does he pay the 100 seller or the malchus. Case number 3. She was born as conceived as a Yid, but her mother was committed before, and born as a Yid. She's a Yid in every respect. Even though in certain dinim we had in Morivam, but Chalitza, other things, be a Bezdin, you need Imam Yisrael, and here it isn't, but it doesn't matter. As far as she's concerned, she's a full-fledged Yid regarding all of these dinim. Okay, next case. Yeshla of the Einla Pesach Beisav. What happens? They have a father, but they don't have a house. Or Yeshla Pesach, they have a house, but the Einla of, she's a Yisayma. She has a full-fledged Yid, but she has no father. Then, but the Torah says Beisavir. Does that mean that the husband doesn't get punished, or what happens in this case? No, everything happens the same as the pasuk says. That condition of Pesach Beisav is only ideal situation, but it's not in any way mandatory. Says the Gemara, how do you know that if she was conceived as a goy but born as a yid, she still gets skill? If your argument is that says Yisrael, she's not a Yisrael, she's not a full Yisrael, she's still Geiris. And she died is what's of the extra vav. The rabbi is to include an extra case, and that is she was conceived not as a yid, but like Dasa because she was born as a yid. Says the Gemara. If you're telling me to consider full-fledged yid, then why don't other dinim also apply? For example, that he should pay the $100, he should get malchus. If she's considered a full-fledged yid, because then the pasuk vam mesa and she should die, then we should treat it completely as a yid, and he should be equally punished, pay the knas, the penalty, and he should get his lashes. On Makra, it says the pasuk vam mesa. The misa nisraf, the only thing that we're considering her full-fledged is as far as her punishment is concerned, that she receive skila, but below the knas, not as far as the penalty is concerned, as far as he's concerned. Says the Gemara, the aim of why don't we say that if you're ready, increase, expanding it. Let's go a step further and say that even if she was born, let's say the rabbis. Why don't we just say it's coming to include someone that was conceived and born as a yid? Now, why do we need to include that? The Gemara right now thinks because in certain cases we say that the mother has to be yid as well, and this person, the mother's not a yid. So maybe you would have thought not 100% a full-fledged yid. So maybe the pasuk is only limited to include someone who's conceived. Her mother became a giyedis before she fell pregnant. So for that, how he you say in this case here, that is considered a full-fledged yid. It's not a case of a bezin where it says mekeda v'chich and all that hid. As far as we're concerned here, she's considered full-fledged yid, and therefore we don't need a special limud for that. Must be coming to teach us if she's conceived as a goy but born as a yid. Says he, okay, maybe go a step further and say even if it's born as a goy, as long as under 3 years old, and she's a psula, she's also be considered a yid in this respect. Even if she's conceived as a goy and born as a goy, why in the world would the Torah stress Beit Yisrael if it doesn't make any difference at all? Because tell me even if she's a giyedis, it's good enough. So by stressing Beit Yisrael, we need to limit who she is. Now, if somebody, let's say, if goes out and casts a shemra on an orphan, if his wife was an orphan, potter, he is potter. He is potter from Malchus and from Meir Kesef. Why? Because the pasuk clearly says, it says, you punish him the penalty, the monetary penalty, and what? And who should he give it to? It says the pasuk, v'nosnu, you should give it to the Avi HaNaira, the father of the Naira. In other words, she has to have a father. Prat lazu she'ein lo. This person has no father. So because this person has no father, this is saying, therefore, you don't give the penalty. You don't administer the penalty. Says the Gemara, that's a question. We came out of Rabbi Yeshua. It says in the pasuk regarding a mefata. It says in the pasuk, if the father refuses, and mefata, it says, talking about a mefata. All right, we say that because he seduced this girl, one of the punishments is that he has to marry her. But the pasuk says, but if they refuse, then he has to pay the money, the penalty. It says double yimayin to teach you that the father can refuse or the daughter can refuse. Either one can refuse. So what do we see? That now, but Oinus have the same din of father. By Oinus it says, V'nosan, you should give la via naira, you should pay to the father of the girl the $50 the penalty. And Oinus and Mafata exactly the same thing. In other words, we made a hekesh there. So that's how we know 50 and Shkol in both. So therefore, it's as if it's written V'nosan la via naira by Mafata as well. And nevertheless, it seems from the pasuk that even the naira on her own, even if she has no father, she can go ahead and say, "I don't want to marry." So what do we see? That just because of the naira doesn't necessarily mean that you need an avia naira, and a yisayma, the same thing applies. So how can you come along and say that a yisayma? Rabbi Chanina says that if you mention a yisayma, there's no penalty. Just because of avia naira, we see in other places, doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be the way. If it isn't, it isn't. That tells you that a yisayma pays knas as well, even though there's avia naira there. The word he asked the question, he answers no. Over there, when we say that the girl can go ahead and say, "I'm not interested," there was a father at the time of this terrible of the act, and the father passed away before there was able to be before they actually got married. So then the father passed away. The daughter can say, "I refuse." But we're talking about a case here where there was no father at all at the time. Over there is talking about at the time when they had the relationship, the father, she had a father. So then, even though afterwards when it came to the decision, the father no longer around, she's not considered. There wasn't avia naira. to give it to. We're talking about a case of here that from that there was no Avi Hanaira at all. There was no father. There's only a Sema. There's no dinner Moitze Shemra as far as he's concerned. Rava says, I disagree with you totally, I disagree with you, and I hold that if you Moitze Shemra and Sema, you still have to pay. It says Avi Hanaira. So he says very simply, Chai. Then how do I know? But Tony Ami said, it says in Pasuk, you pay the 100 by Moitze Shemra. It says you have to pay the Mei Kesef, and you got to give it to the Avi Hanaira, which is what you want to learn from you want to infer that there has to be a father involved. And then he says, Besulas Yisro. And it says Besulas Yisro. It says in the Pasuk, this is what Ami says. When it says in the Pasuk, a Psula of Yisro, but not the Psula of Gerim. Not by, you don't pay by a Psula of Gerim, you don't pay the $100. Now, what do you need a special pasuk for Psulas Gerim? No ger has a father. That's what a ger is. There's no relationship that we had in Mori Bamas. So what do you need a pasuk B'Sulas Gerim? Is that you say automatically? Is that an ordinary Yisrael Yisrael you do pay, but because they're Gerim, they're not a Yisrael, you don't pay. Clear that Yisrael does pay. Yeah, Mishlemi guy got to be some Chai by you to be Chai, nobody knows she's Yisrael, no father. And it's going to put again. If you have to exclude Gerim, that you have that part, even though they have the father, not having father has no bearing in it, but nevertheless, you don't have the punishment of paying the 100 kesef. Eliam to be Yisrael Kagav pot, but Yisrael pot as well. Then every geir is a Yisrael halachically. Hash to be so pot, the begaid and beboyer from begaid. The Baal Turn in Pasuk Seiti learns that. How do you know that a gerish is a guy cutting shenrei dummy? He says because it says in the Pasuk Baalman of Yosem, and it says the geidim, and so he teaches Yosem geir that every geir is a Yosem, because they have no family. So therefore, Rabbi disagrees. He says that Yisrael definitely, the wife of Yisrael, and he's Moitze Shemra, he has to pay all the penalties. Next case, Amar Shlagi says, Moitze Shemra like Tana, not talking about an orphanage, just like a Tana, but still I'm talking about a Naida, because the pasuk says Lavi HaNaida. And normally when it says Naira in the Torah, it's written without a hay. Here, the Naira is with a hay. And we already had it before. So Shlaki says, somebody's Moitze Shemra on a young, on a minor, potter, you are potter from the penalty. It says, you should give Lavi HaNaida. So we understand the reason is because there's a hay there comes to tell you that only if she's over 12 years old, you pay the penalties. Maski, Lord of Achabara has a question. Time it seems the only reason is because there's a hay there. So therefore we say it means over 12. Had it not been for that, I would have thought that the din of Moitze Shemra is even if she's a younger girl and he married her and he cast these aspersions, and if he turned out to be they were all liars, that he would have to pay. I feel like Tana, how could it be? It says the Torah says two options, right? Either he's a liar or telling the truth. If he's a liar, he has to pay penalties. If he's telling the truth, and she gets stoned. But if she's like Tana, you don't get punished. So they can't be talking about a Tana, the entire parsha. But he says in pasuk, but if it's true, then lanim psula naira, there's no psulim to this naira. And what happens? See you as a naira, you take her outside, just go and you stone her. No, but no Tana labas minor, there's no punishment. Ella kan naira. Definitely talking about when it comes to the punishment side of things, definitely she has to be a naira. So sorry. So therefore, definitely a naira. I don't need a special pasuk. So Gemara says you're right. Katana definitely there's no din of Moitze Shemra. We're talking about a naira. But what Shlish Lakish was saying was something else. Over here, definitely talking about a girl over 12, and naira spelled with a hay. So from here on out, where naira is spelled without a hay, other parts of the Torah, it's including Katana as well. I feel like Katana b'mashra. Katana is included. Now the Gemara starts a new thing, so we will continue.